Okay, so wealth inequality, right? Something we all hear about, like billionaires going to space while other people can't afford, basic necessities. And it's a pretty, I don't know, a pretty jarring contrast. So today, we're going to kind of dive into this whole issue using this source called Why Poor People Can't Catch a Break. We'll break down the arguments, look at the stats, and hopefully by the end, you'll have a better understanding of what it all means.
Yeah, I mean, the title itself is definitely, let's just say it's provocative. And the content, it doesn't hold back.
Oh, okay. I like where this is going. So first things first, how does this source actually define the problem? Is it just like, people don't have enough money, or is there more to it?
Right. It's way more nuanced than that. The source argues that poverty is like this complex system, almost like, you're stuck on a hamster wheel, and it makes it incredibly difficult to escape. It really pushes back against this idea that poverty is just a personal failing.
That's interesting. It's more like there are these larger forces at play.
Exactly. And to really drive that point home, they hit you with this, really stark statistic. The world's richest 1%, just the top 1%, own over 50% of all the wealth in the world.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot.
It is. And then they follow that up with, get those 10% of the world's population they can't even afford to eat.
That's a massive gap.
It is. It's a huge disparity.
Yeah, and this isn't just some far-off global problem. I mean, we see the same gap playing out here in the U.S. too, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the source points out that in the U.S., the top 0.1% of earners make, are you ready for this, 196 times more than the bottom 90%.
196 times. That's hard to even imagine.
It's mind-boggling. It really makes you wonder if we're all playing on the same field.
You hear these figures, and it's hard to wrap your head around it. And what about that whole the bootstraps argument? Just work harder and you'll get ahead.
Right.
What's the source's take on that?
They completely debunk it. The source is pretty clear. Upward mobility, that idea that you can climb the economic ladder through sheer effort, they say it's often a fantasy.
A fantasy. Wow.
Yeah. They argue that these systemic barriers, things like lack of access to, good education or healthcare, even social networks, they make it almost impossible to break free from poverty.
So even if you're working as hard as you can, the system might be working against you.
Right. The playing field is tilted, so to speak. And get this, they even have this whole section called Secrets the Elites Don't Want You to Know.
Secrets. Okay, now you've got me hooked.
Yeah.
Tell me more about these secrets.
Well, for starters, they talk about taxes. You know how we always hear about everyone paying their fair share? Well, they argue that that's not always the reality.
Oh, really? How so?
They point out that billionaires, through all sorts of loopholes in these offshore accounts, end up paying a lower effective tax rate than the average person.
Wait, so they're paying less even though they have way more?
Exactly. And they even give this example. Billionaires paying, on average, an effective tax rate of 8%, while middle-class families are paying something like 22%.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And that ties into another secret they reveal, this idea of the price of poverty.
The price of poverty. What does he mean by that?
Well, it's not just about not having enough money. They argue that being poor actually costs you more.
So you're saying it's more expensive to be poor. How does that work?
Well, think about it. Think about things like payday loans. They come with these insanely high interest rates.
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean. If you're desperate for cash, those loans can really trap you.
Right. And then there are things like grocery prices. Often in low-income neighborhoods, you find that grocery prices are actually higher.
It's like the system is designed to keep you down.
That's exactly the point they're making. And then, to really make you think, they contrast all of this with, the lifestyles of the super rich.
Oh, yeah, they really highlight the excess.
Oh, yeah, big time. They use some pretty crazy examples like, did you know that Jeff Bezos makes about $3,715 every second?
Every second. That's insane.
Right. And then they're like, oh, and by the way, 1 in 5 children in the U.S. lives in poverty.
It's almost like we're living in two different worlds.
It is. And they're not afraid to, criticize capitalism and how it contributes to these disparities.
Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of systems, they also talk about this whole idea of generational poverty.
Right. It's this idea that, poverty isn't just a present circumstance, it can be inherited.
Inherited? How does that work?
Well, they say that lack of access to good education, health care, all those things, they can be passed down through generations.
Oh, I see. So it's like a cycle that's really hard to break.
Exactly. And it's not just about material things, it's about networks and opportunities too. They even use this term that's been going around a lot lately, nepotism babies.
Oh, nepotism babies. I've heard that term, but what does it actually mean?
It basically refers to children of successful or influential people who, well, they benefit from their parents' connections.
So they have a built-in advantage from the start.
Right. It's not a level playing field. And it shows how advantages and disadvantages are often passed down through families.
That makes a lot of sense. And they talk about food deserts too, right?
Yes. They explain how food deserts, which are typically in low-income neighborhoods, make it incredibly difficult to access fresh, healthy food.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. People end up relying on convenience stores or fast food, which isn't good for anyone's health.
And then, that can lead to more health problems, more healthcare costs, and it kind of perpetuates that cycle of poverty.
It's like this domino effect.
Okay.
So we've covered some pretty heavy stuff. What else does this source tell us about wealth inequality? Okay, so we're back and diving deeper into wealth inequality. And, it can be a bit overwhelming, all this information, right? But I think one thing that stood out to me from this source, why poor people can't catch a break, is that they don't just point fingers. They offer some ways to actually, fight back against these systems.
Right. It's easy to feel like, what can one person do? But the source, they kind of remind us that even small changes in our own behavior, it can actually, contribute to a more just world. They use this analogy, it's like a ripple effect. One small action, and then, whoosh, it can create these waves of change.
Okay, I like that. So where do we even start? What are some of these small actions that can create those ripples?
Well, they talk a lot about the power of conscious consumerism. It's like voting with your wallet.
Oh, I've heard that term before. It means like supporting businesses that are doing things the right way, right?
Exactly. It's about prioritizing businesses that, pay their workers fairly, practice sustainability, all that good stuff.
So every time we spend money, we're kind of making a statement about what we value.
Right. It's about aligning your spending with your values. It's easy to just go for what's convenient or cheapest, but maybe, take a second to think about who are you supporting with your money.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's not just about individual choices, right?
Yeah.
They also talk about pushing for bigger changes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Systemic changes.
They talk about things like universal basic income and progressive taxation. Those can sound pretty radical to some people.
They can, but the source argues that these are more like measures of basic fairness.
Okay, so how do they frame universal basic income? Because I think some people think of it as like just giving everyone free money.
Right. There's that misconception. But the source presents it as like a safety net. It's about ensuring that everyone has at least a basic level of financial security.
A foundation to build on.
Exactly. And then progressive taxation, that's where the wealthy pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes.
Okay, and what's the logic behind that?
Well, it's about creating a more equitable system, right? So that the burden isn't disproportionately on the middle and working class.
So it's kind of like redistributing the wealth a bit.
In a way, yeah. It's about making sure that those who can afford to contribute more actually do.
Right. And it's not just about money either, is it? I mean, they talk about access to things like healthcare and education.
Oh, absolutely. Those are crucial. The source really emphasizes that we need a society where everyone has access to those essential resources.
So it's about more than just financial assistance. It's about creating a system where everyone has the opportunity to succeed.
Yes. And it's about tackling those root causes of inequality so that, we can break that cycle of poverty.
Break the cycle, yeah. I remember in the first part, they had this really powerful statement about the world's richest 1%.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about the one where they said if the world's richest 1% gave up just 1% of their wealth, we could solve global poverty?
That's the one. Just makes you think, doesn't it? Like, wow, the scale of this problem is just massive.
It is. But it also kind of highlights, the potential solutions. It makes you think about, like, what is our responsibility, as individuals to create a more equitable world?
Yeah, it's easy to just, throw your hands up and say, well, I'm just one person. What can I do?
Right. But this source is saying, hey, even individual actions, when they're combined with collective efforts, they can lead to real change.
It's about realizing that we're not powerless, even in the face of these huge systemic issues.
Exactly. And it starts with asking ourselves some tough questions, like, what are we willing to sacrifice for the well-being of others? What kind of world do we want to live in?
Yeah, those are some deep questions. And I think sometimes it's easy to get so caught up in the numbers and the statistics that we forget that there are real people behind all of this.
That's so true. Behind those statistics are real people whose lives are being deeply affected by these systems of inequality.
Right. And this source, it doesn't just throw facts and figures at you. It tries to spark a conversation. It challenges us to think differently.
Exactly. It's about envisioning a different reality.
A better reality.
Yeah, and realizing that we have the power to create that reality, both as individuals and as a collective.
So it's empowering.
It is, but it's also a call to action.
Right. It's not enough to just understand the problem. We have to actually do something about it.
Exactly. We have to take that knowledge and turn it into action.
Well, this deep dive is definitely making me rethink some things.
Me too.
I'm starting to think about what changes I can make in my own life and how I can contribute to a more just world.
That's fantastic. And remember, every action, no matter how small, it can contribute to a larger movement for change.
I'm definitely ready to hear about more solutions and actionable steps, ready to keep this conversation going.
Okay, great. Let's explore how we can take all this knowledge and turn it into tangible action, how we can create a better future for everyone.
So here we are, back again, still unpacking wealth inequality. It's been quite a journey, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it has. We've definitely had to face some hard truths about, the systems we live under.
You know what's been great about this source, this why poor people can't catch a break, is that it doesn't just, leave you hanging. They offer some pretty concrete ways to push back against these systems and actually do something.
Right, they're big on action.
Yeah, they really are. So in this last part, let's focus on that, turning knowledge into action. Because awareness is great and all, but it's only the first step, right?
You got it. Can't change what you don't understand. That's their whole point.
Hmm.
So now that we've kind of laid it all out, what do you do with this information?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
What can we as listeners actually do? I know they mentioned some books, right, for folks who want to go deeper.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They highly recommend The Divide and Winner Takes All for anyone who wants to really dig into this stuff.
Got to add those to my reading list. But reading is one thing. What about day-to-day actions? What can we change in our own lives?
Well, they talk a lot about supporting ethical businesses, companies that actually walk the walk when it comes to fair wages, sustainable practices, treating their employees right.
Right. So it's about being more intentional with where we spend our money.
Exactly. It's so easy to just default to whatever's cheapest or most convenient.
Oh, totally guilty of that sometimes.
But think about it. Each purchase is kind of like a vote.
A vote for what you value.
Exactly. And then even bigger picture, there's advocating for systemic changes.
Yeah, they talked about things like universal basic income and progressive taxation.
Yep, those came up. And I know they can sound radical to some people.
They do.
Yeah.
But the source seems to think they're necessary.
They present them as essential for fairness, for making sure everyone has a real shot, you know? Not just scraping by.
So it's about changing the whole system, not just putting Band-Aids on the problem.
Right, getting to the root of it.
And they make a point that we all have a voice in this, right?
Absolutely. Whether it's contacting our representatives, supporting organizations that are fighting for change, even just having conversations with friends and family.
Getting people thinking differently about these issues.
Exactly. It all adds up.
Yeah, I'm seeing this theme throughout the source, that individual action plus collective effort, that's where the real power lies.
It's like that ripple effect we talked about, but on a massive scale.
A tidal wave of change.
Exactly. And even though this problem of wealth inequality, it's huge, it's complex, it's not hopeless.
That's so important to remember.
We can build a better world. It's just going to take all of us working together.
Well, this whole deep dive has really opened my eyes.
Me too.
It's made me think more critically about the world we live in and, honestly, my own role in making things better.
That's amazing to hear. That's what we were hoping for.
It's easy to get overwhelmed, but the source reminds you we're not helpless. We each have a part to play.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a pleasure exploring all this with you.
Likewise. And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Maybe sparked some new ideas and inspired you to keep learning and keep questioning. Because this conversation, it doesn't end here. Let's all keep working towards that future where everyone, truly everyone, has the chance to thrive.